state's Head Start and Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program.
How do we do curriculum and organizing the classroom when we've got some kids at 2-year-old level and some kids at 5-year-old level in the same classroom?
Her group's calling on the legislature to increase funding for classroom support. This is KUOW.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Pew Charitable Trusts, now sharing stories and solutions from the front lines of America's mental health crisis on the After the Fact podcast, available at pewtrusts.org/After the Fact.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. The city of Seattle is trying to add trees, yet in the last 5 years, we've lost tree canopy, a loss the size of Green Lake. Why is that? And can Seattle have branches and leaves and also density? We'll discuss that and the rest of the week because that's what we do on Week in Review. Today with Seattle Times General Assignment Reporter Amanda Zhou. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Bill.
Seattle Met Magazine Deputy Editor Allison Williams. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Bill.
And soon to be joining us, South Seattle Emerald founder and Seattle Times columnist Marcus Harrison Green. And you can watch the program because we're on YouTube and we're on Facebook, and all you have to do is search KUOW Public Radio. Okay, our first topic sounds so soothing. Shade, branches, canopy. But you know it's not news unless it's troubling here at KUOW. The city of Seattle lost 255 acres of tree canopy in the last 5 years. Amanda, before we learn why that is, will you remind us why trees matter?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people in Seattle would say that they're quite aesthetically important to the city and the identity. But on a more practical standpoint, they're really important when it comes to climate change resiliency. They provide shade on those really hot days we have during the summer. And then in times of heavy rainfall, they soak up water. So essentially, they're important for climate change effects.
Right. We've all heard about heat islands. And where, do you know, Allison, where Seattle is losing tree canopy?
Well, I know Amanda has looked into this. I was reading a little bit about just the idea of tree canopy and heat islands and where they're located in the city and why that's such an equity issue. And that is because it is not an even spread of where we have these heat islands. They tend to be in neighborhoods on the southern end of Seattle. They tend to be in neighborhoods with poorer population and places where the heat is affecting people more. We had a big heat wave last year, and people died. Over the last couple of years, we've started to see that extreme heat is actually very dangerous. It's not just uncomfortable, and it's hitting some neighborhoods, South Rainier Beach and down south much more than it is north of Seattle.
And do we know why I can think of various reasons why we could lose trees. What mostly is going on, Amanda?
I think a lot of the loss, according to this report that came out recently, has occurred on residential areas. So I think sometimes trees are being cut down for new developments. And then we also see that trees are lost in the right of way. And my guess would be that's just normal pruning and tree health problems. The right of way. I saw the biggest net decrease in canopy was in Seattle's natural areas. I think this is either Crosscut or Seattle Times where I read this, like the West Duwamish Greenbelt in West Seattle, much of Discovery Park and Magnolia, and most of Interlochen Park on Capitol Hill. And when I heard about the West Duwamish Greenbelt, I thought, hey, this time period includes the time when, remember those homeowners in West Seattle?
Oh, they cut down the trees so they could preserve their view. And
like more than 150 trees. That's significant. A lot. And one of them was Marty Reamer from 103.7 The Mountain, ironically enough. So is that a negligible factor? People sneakily getting rid of trees? That's not what we're talking about here in this 5-year tree canopy loss.
Well, the issue of needing to report when you remove trees is a real one. I mean, that was not on their land, as I understand it, or
right.
It was designated. So that would have been illegal in any situation.
In fact, on a slope that the city had called environmentally sensitive because of landslides. threat.
But it is newly important and required for people to note when they are doing significant tree removal.
Yeah, that is something that I know that Seattle City Council members are looking to improve this year, which is that we do have some tree protection ordinances in place, which pretty much says, if you have a tree of a certain size, you can't cut it down, or you can't cut it down without replacing it in some way. So it is something that I think politicians are trying to have a little bit more control on, whether the trees are on a residential property or, publicly owned trees.
Okay. But there are other big reasons why we lose trees. We have, for one thing, a lot of Seattle got cut about, 100, 150 years ago, right? And isn't that, there's a certain amount of just a natural lifespan of trees that are old. And plus we have climate change, which, I think makes trees weaker, right? More vulnerable to pests. They need more water. They're high maintenance in the first place. And as you said, development, which is interesting because the city on one hand is densifying, but can the city get denser and create more housing and also save trees?
Yeah. So I mentioned that Seattle City Council members are looking to improve the tree ordinance. And one barrier that's kind of come up in the last year is that I think the Master Builders Association pretty much tried to challenge it and say, hey, this would make it really hard for us to build affordable housing and dense housing. These regulations get in the way. So I think it is a trade-off and something that, might take creative solutions to ensure that, we have a canopy in Seattle and we're resilient to when there are heat waves, but also that we build new housing, which everyone agrees that we need more of.
Right. So nice when everyone agrees on mutually incompatible goals.
Trees, nice. Housing, good.
Right. Well, if Seattle were to keep its all its single family zoning, would that mean that more trees will be cut down just in other places to build homes in those places?
I really don't know the answer to that. I thought it was really interesting in the report. You could see which areas had net growth and where there had been net loss in trees. And I saw that in like Ballard, Magnolia, Queen Anne, all of those areas had seen an increased amount of trees in the last couple of years. And I was kind of like, wow, no surprise, those neighborhoods got the new trees. But yeah, I don't know about that single family zoning, how that tees up with trees.
Mm-hmm. Well, clearly the answer is tree houses. If you want to have
the single family tree house.
Yes. I think we've solved that particular problem. Allison, I want to end this tree segment on a certain kind of tree. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide.
This has been Poetry Hour with Bill Radke.
Maybe more poetry you'll hear in a year from me. Talking about the cherry trees near Pike Place Market.
Yeah. I saw this was reported by Northwest Asian Weekly that several of the cherry trees that are down there near Pike Place Market were marked for removal. And it's a foundation or an organization that has been looking at the redevelopment around Pike Place Market and worries about a large building that's coming in, that noticed that this was happening and sort of put their attention towards these cherry trees. And, it sounds like they're going to be replaced with elm trees rather than new cherry trees. And of course, the cherry trees have a connection to Seattle with our Japanese American community. We have quite a few of them on the University of Washington campus. Mm-hmm. They bloom. It's a cultural event. It's a nature event that brings out a lot of photographers. And it's sounding like those cherry trees are probably going to be coming down even before they bloom this year. And, what's really interesting to me is how, this is such a widespread issue about trees and climate change and equity, but we as people, we really attach ourselves to specific things. We're not good at thinking about this on a citywide scale. We're thinking about that one tree. There's a tree that just came down in Capitol Hill that I swear every person in the neighborhood said something about it when it came down because it meant so much to people, this beautiful one old tree. Mm-hmm. And I think this cherry tree it represents for people construction downtown. It represents the city's past. It represents a beautiful photo of blooming cherry trees in front of Pike Place Market. So I I don't know all of the factors that went into deciding, which trees are going to grow the fastest and have the best foliage and be well suited to that street. But the symbolism of it is really, I think, what catches a lot of people's attention. And, if nothing else, can sometimes make people aware of the issue of trees in our streets just by the notability of those.
Mm-hmm. And is anyone trying to save those cherry trees? Or is this happening? Sure.
I have not been down there in the last couple of days. Again, Northwest Asian Weekly reported this, and the signs on the trees did say that they were coming down, I believe, this weekend. So I don't know if it's possible. There was a phone number for to get more information that I tried calling and was not able to reach anybody. So I don't know.
Yeah, I noticed in that story, I think they had quoted the advocates quoting the city that there had been a public comment period for, I think, the general Pike Place renovations. But I mean, on one hand, like, it seems like the city had a schedule and they're sticking to it. But on the other, like, I would never underestimate Seattleites and
Yes.
just how much they love their trees here.
Right. I couldn't picture an elm bloom. So I had to look up what an elm looks like. It's fine. It's no cherry tree.
We really attach ourselves to certain trees.
Yeah.
We have our evergreens, we have our Douglas fir, we have our cedar trees have deep meaning that the cherry trees do. So yeah, we don't quite have that connection to elms.
Yeah. Speaking of firs and cherries, the city is trying to add more conifers, more evergreen trees, which, used to be the way, right?
Fewer leaves to rake up.
Fewer leaves, exactly. Needles over leaves. Okay. So we'll leave trees for a moment.
And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room. About the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move to, if we started with trees, wasn't that a nice way to start a program with trees?
Yes.
We heard a cherry blossom poem. So let's keep those vibes rolling by taking you back to a Seattle summer. Like I said, it ain't news unless it's troubling. So on a gorgeous day last August, King 5 took us to the ferry line in Edmonds, where a woman named Diana was sitting in her car waiting and waiting.
What would normally take me an hour to 2 hours can take 3 to 4 to 5 hours, depending on the ferry lines. Coming over today, I had to bump my lunch date with my friend I hadn't seen for 30 years, until the next boat.
You haven't seen your friend in 30 years? What's one more boat? But it's bad. They're long. We know ferry lines have been a mess. Schedules have been a mess. We've been down boats through the pandemic. And this week, Washington State Ferries gave us an update. Before we hear about the update, who can tell us why our ferries have been so verkakta?
I can say something about it.
Right.
A lot of it has to do between aging boats and staffing. So there's sort of two effects going on at Washington State Ferries, which is that a lot of their highly trained, I don't know what else to say besides people who run the ferry. A lot of them are of retirement age and are sort of aging out of the workforce. And then on the other hand, it's been hard to recruit for them to get new employees. It takes several years to just go up the ladder. And so they've had trouble with that too, but it seems like they're trending in the right direction. Like, they've made more hires, but they're still sort of below where they need to be when it comes to staff.
And I know we saw that in just so many different industries, but particularly there you have, folks that were close to retirement when the pandemic hit may have, retired a little bit early. You can't just make a ferry boat captain in, a few months. So,
well, the ferry system has checked in this week and said, well, we've restored full service on 4 out of our 8 routes, including that Edmonds to Kingston run. So is the ferry system completely restored?
Well, it's not completely restored, and there's some dates coming up. I think Bremerton's going to get its second boat maybe later this year. I think Port Townsend is 2024 to get their second boat back. And then notably, one of the routes, one we don't think about a lot, up in the San Juans, they have a route over to Sydney, BC. That's on Vancouver Island. Until this week, the note was that it was not coming back before this summer at the earliest, and they just announced that it's 2030 at the earliest, which is not a year that we like to think about. but-
2030. We asked the ferry spokesperson, Ian Sterling, about it, and he said there's only one boat that's certified to make that Anacortes to Sydney trip, and we need it in the Puget Sound.
If you were to talk to people in Anacortes and the San Juan Islands, they want to see that service operating normally rather than, going up to Canada, which is a nice to have. It's not a have to have at this point in time.
Couldn't we get Canada to run that route for us?
Well, the thing is, Canada does run a lot of ferry routes, and it's kind of fun to have that San Juan ferry pop over into Canada. But the truth is, there's a lot of other ways to get up to Canada. We have, again, the Canada's ferry system that goes out of Swassen, which is right across the border. You can drive up to, or there's a private ferry company that operates out of Port Angeles, the Blackball ferry, and it goes right into downtown Victoria. You can park in Port Angeles and walk on the ferry and have a whole weekend there. So,
And then there's always the Victoria,
Victoria
Clipper, which
yes.
resumed service this week.
Absolutely. And it comes out of downtown Seattle. We have float planes that head up to Victoria. I think the commuter routes that are used in Puget Sound are a little more important to restore, which is why the Sydney route sort of got left at the bottom.
Yeah. We're talking ferries and on KUOW's Week in Review, and we're talking about them with my guests. We have Amanda Zhou from the Seattle Times. We have Allison Williams from Seattle Met, and we have South Seattle Emerald's founder and Seattle Times columnist, Marcus Harrison Green. Hiya, Marcus.
I'm doing great. I couldn't let you all have all the fun today.
No.
I'm right here.
Glad. Wouldn't have it any other way. How about we're talking ferries? First of all, any observations about ferries, or do you feel we covered it?
I think that Allison did a great job.
Okay,
So.
agreed. Victoria Clipper is back in service after maintenance, and then one more transportation wait line news item here, Allison. SeaTac's getting money to make security go a little faster.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you get people at the ferry lines complaining about their wait and people waiting for security at SeaTac, it could be a little battle of who's having the longest.
Who
waits.
has it the worst?
Yes.
Yeah.
SeaTac has been aware, I think, of some really lengthy waits they have going on. If you've been out of there recently, you hear them talking a lot about telling people to pick up arrivals at the departures level instead of the arrivals, to try to spread people out.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing, they just got some federal money to move one of their security stations down a level to that arrivals level. It's going to give them more space to have some more updated equipment, and again, hopefully spread out passengers a little bit. SeaTac, it is an incredibly busy airport. I think we've all learned that you cannot roll up 35 minutes before your flight and expect to make it. But we are seeing some upgrades. They have their Spot Saver system, which they've made permanent, which is a free system. It's not TSA pre-check and it's not clear. It's the kind of thing you log on in advance, a couple days, I think, before your flight. You can do it, and you reserve a time window to go through security. You don't have to have an interview like you do with TSA pre-check, and you don't have to pay like you might with Clear. And I got to say, I just went to New Mexico last weekend and made myself a little Spot Saver reservation, and I was in and out very quickly. So you still have to take off your shoes though. So,
Okay. Thanks.
Wear the non-holy socks, but
Okay,
you
wear
should be
your
able to get through
best
security
socks.
a little faster.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Spot Saver. Thanks, Allison. By the way, what are the cars doing if you drive up to the airport and then you see a line of cars just sitting there? Are those, what are they doing? Are those
I think they're-
Ubers and Lyfts, or are those?
They're likely waiting for people who are arriving. There is a special parking lot
There's a
called the
cell phone lot for that.
Yeah, this has been sort of perennial issue where like the airport is trying to up enforcement and threatens all these fines, and Washington State troopers. But yeah, yet people still are parking on the side of pretty much what is a highway.
Yeah. Yeah. What could go wrong? Speaking of what could go wrong in cars, we're going to move to that form of transportation. All of you have driven south on I-5 into downtown Seattle, I take it. Have you taken the Union Street exit? Not so much you, Amanda. Do you know the exit that I'm talking about?
Very well.
Okay, very well.
Used to
What
date
okay,
somebody who I would get off on that exit and go see. So yes.
Okay, so what's that experience like for you, Marcus?
I mean, it is sort of in somewhat, taking your life into your own hands a little bit from here to here. But overall, though, I think that it's a doable turn to make. I will say that.
Yeah, and it's not It's not 90 degrees.
Gosh, I don't know what number of degrees it is, but it is a very sharp turn. It's when you're sort of down in the convention center and stuff. It's kind of half tunnels, half bridges above you. And you go from being on a freeway to downtown Seattle very quickly, and with a very sharp turn that not everybody's making, or not everybody's slowing down enough to make.
No. And we know this because I saw it was a Cairo 7 reporter in this case who tweeted, but she's not the first, but there is a video, a compilation of car after car, I think 17, blowing it on that curve.
Right.
And I looked at the map. I looked at Google Maps. It's maybe 45 degrees. There are signs. I mean, you're leaving the freeway. You're in a city. There are signs that say 30 miles per hour. I know somebody on Twitter said 20, but the sign. I watched another video from a driver's point of view. I mean, what's happening? What is the deal?
And I'll say this, in those videos, right? It showed in many of them there were like 3 or 4 other cars that were parked, and it just made the turn just fine. So obviously, there are people able to do it.
It can be done.
I have to say, yes.
Yeah.
Although I will say, looking at that video, there's this whole thing that Gen Z doesn't like to drive and yada yada yada. I will say that video is maybe the cure for wanting to get a driver's license.
Yes.
Because it looks like a demolition derby right there.
It really does.
Well, I think we've trained ourselves not to believe it when they say this curve's coming up and you need to slow down. We're like, yeah, I'll go from 60 down to 55. And
yeah. I used to ride on the back of in high school of a friend's motorcycle. And he used to say, they conveniently make these exit signs exactly half the speed that you should actually be going when you come on. Well, so here's the thing. I try to bring up, I'm always noticing words that we use, the words in the news, words and phrases that catch my attention. And I would say this week's word of the week is accident, because some people say we should stop calling them car accidents because they're really not accidental. We design cars and roads in such a way that this is going to happen, that people will spin out on freeway exits and people will ram into each other. What do you all think of that?
Well, we were just talking about this earlier. To me, the problem with the word car accident is not as much the word accident, because I don't think that people want them to happen. It's with the word car, because when somebody goes off that exit way too fast and ends up getting into smashing up their car, it's because of the driver. And it's not necessarily the car, something that did on their own. I think maybe we should be thinking them as driver incidents or driver accidents, because we need to take a little bit more responsibility for what we do with these large vehicles.
I mean, Allison, I largely agree with you, Allison. I would push back a little bit. They have that whole autonomous driver feature on Tesla. And I mean, that doesn't seem to be working any better than the average run of the mill person. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, fair point. Should we stop saying accident, Amanda?
I think most of the debates I've heard around this have to do with victim blaming, or who's to blame when there's a collision. But I will say, as a reporter, in our style guide, and then also when I've talked to law enforcement, when I've talked to pedestrian advocates, all of them say to use collision. So it seems like that's kind of the new accepted term.
Yeah, collision is the new accident. Can I tell you something that I'm not proud of, but I'm just going to be vulnerable with you?
Absolutely.
I kind of enjoyed watching the video because I knew that this of the Union Street flip outs, because I knew that nobody was seriously hurt in this video, at least because the way the Cairo reporter sends it out, crash magnet, exclamation mark, it's going viral. So I didn't want to see anybody hurt, but there was something, I don't know if it's Schadenfreude. It's some sort of like, it connects with the question of whether we should call it an accident, because there's kind of a hubris in the fact that we drive around in cars and we depend on them so much and we go so fast, and probably we don't pay attention. I don't pay attention all the time,
It's like why we like watching the videos when it snows in Seattle of people ping-ponging down.
Yes. I enjoy watching those videos as long as everyone's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we think I wouldn't do that. That's part of it. We say I wouldn't do that in that situation.
That's it.
What I thought was funny in that video, and I agree that collisions are serious, is that, you would see these other cars that have made that turn perfectly fine. They're like waiting at the stoplight, and then you just hear the like squealing wheels and like the car comes barreling out, and in some cases those cars are like moving out of the way for this like other out of control car.
Yes, which is pretty heads up move on their part.
Yeah.
Were you saying?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, to your point, right? I mean, I think it's it feeds on our whole need for superiority, right? When we're watching these videos, we're like, no, there's no way I would ever be that stupid.
Exactly. Exactly. That is part of it. Yes. I feel like a terrible person, but I feel like at least I've been honest about it. Yeah.
You said what we all were thinking.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway.
I want everyone to be safe. May we all. Okay, so that's a little tree and transportation beginning to week in review. We've got much more to discuss from this week after we take a short break. We are with Amanda Zhou from the Seattle Times, Allison Williams, Seattle Met, and South Seattle Emerald and Seattle Times, Marcus Harrison Green. We're on YouTube and Facebook if you want to search KUOW Public Radio. Up to you either way. Be right back after this short break.
94.9 KUOW. Great to have you with us during the Friday noon hour week in review. And coming up, Seattle protesters gathered to call for the closure of the King County Jail. That's the next topic in just a minute.
Our team of journalists and reporters works hard every day to bring you the truth about what's happening in our community. By becoming a member during our spring member drive next week, you can support our efforts. Join us online at kuow.org/donate.
44 degrees in Seattle's University District. Rain in the forecast for this afternoon. And then tonight, possibility of some snow mixed in with the rain with a low 35. Rain tomorrow. A cloudy day Saturday with a high 46. Time now, 12:32.
It's KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. This week, about 30 downtown Seattle protesters gathered to call for the closure of the King County Jail, which is not as controversial as you might think, since the King County Executive has said the jail needs to close as well. Marcus, what's wrong with this jail?
Yeah, so basically what many of the demonstrators have been saying is that this jail for the longest time has had very decrepit and deplorable conditions. We've seen in the last year or so 9 people who have died in custody at the jail. There was also a recent person who took their own life there. And what they're trying to say is that we continue to have these inhumane circumstances for folks who are either awaiting trial or awaiting sentencing, and that ultimately the King County Executive Dow Constantine, he has said yet another promise of like, hey, yes, no, we do need to close this. It's also in line. He has a history of making certain promises about zero youth detention and closing things, such as the recent, I should say, ongoing protests to close the Youth Detention Center, our Family Justice Center, that's located in Capitol Hill, that has obviously yet to be closed as well. And so I think we have a very immediate issue of, hey, these are conditions that we want to make sure people, don't experience, like regardless of, their station. And then also I think there's the larger macro issue of we live in a city and county that many of the protesters are saying that continues to make these faux promises and proclamations of, hey, we need, zero youth detention. And yet we haven't. What have we done with that? There is supposedly this, this proclamation that he said that Dow Constantine said about closing the jail, and yet it doesn't seem as if we're any closer. And so how do we ultimately, a lot of these protesters are saying we're done with these proclamations. What we want is actual action. And can we reverse engineer from, okay, we want the closure of this jail, we want zero youth detention. So how in the world do we get to a point where we can actually get there? What are the steps and activities that we are taking? And it doesn't appear that there are many.
Well, how much of this is about jails in general being unsafe and or unfair, and how much is it about this particular jail? Why you're talking about 9 people dying in custody? Why, and what does it have to do with this particular King County Jail downtown?
Well, I think if you asked many protesters, they would say that ultimately, like, this particular jail is one that has not, that for the longest time that people have been saying that we need better conditions. We need, we need, and as well as alternative conditions to what, to what these people have been undergoing, right? That these situations are, for the most part, are very inhumane. And so I think when you talk about like this particular jail, I mean, I also think it's again, a larger issue too, in terms of not just, because it isn't just this jail. I mean, it's also issues, I'll say, that are going on in the city in terms of the inequality that goes on, racial inequality, I should say, that goes on in the city that many of the protesters are talking about. They're saying that ultimately you look at what we call the prison, the school to prison pipeline, for instance, right? And that we do know that in this very city, you have folks and you have students, I should say, who are Black students who are suspended in higher numbers, who are from as early as kindergarten and preschool. And is it any wonder now that we have disproportionate amounts of these people who are in jail as well? And so I think what they're trying to do also is make this larger connection of the results that we have in this jail, where it's disproportionately people who are incarcerated as well as disproportionately people who are dying, that this starts very much at a very, very early stage in life, and that this is the inevitable outcome, if you will.
I was just thinking about, we were talking about the Washington State ferries, and there's been staffing issues there. And when there's staffing issues, the ferries don't run, or they run less frequently. In this particular jail, where they've had staffing problems, it leads to the incarcerated people being put in isolation for huge amounts of time, or not having people able to respond to mental health crises. And that effect is just so much more intense. And so it can be things as simple as, inadequate staffing that can lead to these outcomes. That's, such a big problem. And, we've talked a lot over the years about mental health crises in these jail settings, and it's not usually a good combination. I know suicide is not the only way that people have died at this jail, but it is, I believe the rate of suicide is much higher than it is nationally for incarcerated people, and that can come from untreated mental health issues.
Okay, so in short of this jail being closed, which doesn't seem about to happen soon, what are solutions people are advocating for? Fewer people with serious mental health condition, people with mental illnesses going to therapy instead of jail, for example?
Well, I'd also say too, right? I mean, I think it's the fact too that we use jails and prisons so much to criminalize things that actually that are either public health issues or social issues. Like, you think about things like addiction, right? I mean, I think many folks are saying like, look, we need more counselors. We need more centers that can actually help with addiction, right? As opposed to folks who simply just trying to incarcerate our way out of this. And so, I mean, that is certainly one alternative. I think also there's the alternatives of like attempting to, as I said before, trying to weed out the actual root causes of like, why do we have so many folks in jail? Is it just that, folks that are sociopathic and committing crimes, or is it that, no, these are actual, there's an actual cause and effect here, right? These are things that, these are things for the most part that people have, Lord, sorry, I'm just, I'm a bit.
Well, the county is trying to pay for new behavioral health crisis centers, right? Isn't there a vote on that coming out this spring?
Yeah, in April, I think. And, that's always something I'm curious about. These are very complex issues, but sometimes money is just a huge part of that. And I'll be interested to see if the city, at the county, is going to have the will to choose to pay for some alternatives that are better funded and could have better outcomes for people who are being incarcerated for things that are more related to public health.
And Marcus, you wrote an essay in the South Seattle Emerald on the 11th anniversary of Trayvon Martin's death, and you were telling me that there's a connection here.
I'm sorry, Bill, I can't.
You need to take a break?
Yeah.
Okay. Do that then. All right. We're going to continue on KUOW's Week in Review. Speaking of incarceration and what's legal and not, there is a bill in the legislature that would prohibit employers in Washington state from declining to hire someone just because their drug test showed pot in their system, showed cannabis in their system. Amanda, cannabis is legal in Washington state. Why do employers even test for it?
Well, there's some jobs where obviously you cannot be high to be doing it. But I think a lot of it is just that it's sort of the accepted practice in hiring. And it's just sort of stuck on as we've had this change in our approach to cannabis in society. You know, when it was first legalized, there was all these exemptions and all this hand, clutching about, oh, it's for medical use, like not recreational, whatever. And, one of those was sort of saying like, yes, and you can still test for it when you are hiring someone. But yeah, I don't know, it's stuck around. And then also, I should say that there are also federal jobs, and pot is still illegal federally. So it makes sense that, for those federal jobs, they're still testing for it.
Mm-hmm. And a drug test doesn't pick up alcohol use from 2 weeks ago.
I mean, that's the thing is that, pot, it's just a different kind of substance than alcohol as far as what you're able to detect. And not that, say, abusing alcohol couldn't have a negative effect on your work life, but it's not something they really can or do test for or take into account. So, you were asking, why does it matter when you can just stop smoking pot for a couple of weeks and pass a test? And I think that just when you think about the broad spectrum of people applying for and getting jobs, not everybody has the ability to say, oh, I want to get a new job, but I'll just go ahead and hang out for a couple of weeks before I make that happen, or opportunities come up. And I think the understanding, the conversations about how to beat these tests are maybe more common in some communities than others. So you get, some folks that are not able to get employment because they perhaps, don't have the ability to hang out for a couple of weeks before they apply.
Yeah, you're referring to, we had an email exchange about this. The sponsor of this legislation to prohibit employers from denying employment solely based on cannabis coming up in a drug test. The senator is Karen Kaiser from Des Moines. And she said, too many people who see that they have to take a drug test to apply don't even apply. And so I was asking you, would you hire someone who won't stop using cannabis for 2 weeks before an employment drug test?
It's really funny. We've been talking about mental health stuff. I think there's some self-medication that goes on with some cannabis use. And I don't know that I don't want to hire people. That sounds like a whole job that would be way more work than getting to write about fun stuff. So, yeah. But I think it's an issue that doesn't always come down to someone just not willing to put down their joint for a couple of weeks. I think it's broader than that.
And I'll also add that it's not, if you've gone through a drug testing process, it isn't as simple as the person hiring you saying, all right, now, like in 2 weeks, you're going to take a test, like wink, wink, nod, nod. Like sometimes those tests come out of nowhere, or like you're in a process for months and months, and then finally you're asked to take a drug test, and like you might have not been told ahead of time that was coming. So, people are also,
this legislation wouldn't prevent that. You could still be tested when you're on the job. I think they have to have certain reasons if they suspect impairment or if there's an accident. I don't know what the rules are about, but this just wanted to point out this legislation is about pre-employment drug testing.
And notably, I believe it also carves out jobs where impairment could lead to like serious injury or death. If you're operating a forklift or something like that, I believe it wouldn't apply.
That's right. Jobs where impairment on the job means substantial risk of death. It excludes airline and aerospace industries. It excludes those requiring a federal background investigations, you were saying, or security clearance. But I interrupted you. I think, Amanda, I just to highlight
fine.
that. You said what you wanted to say.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah.
Well, if there is still detectable pot in your system, are you affected by it?
Oh gosh, I'm not an expert on that. I believe that it is detectable after it is having an effect on your system. And
I think that's right.
Several
weeks,
yeah.
And if you're a heavy pot user, I think, that can be more than 2 weeks.
Okay. And we don't really have a test for impairment for cannabis. It just either shows up or it doesn't.
I mean, I know that was a question.
It's not like blood alcohol
when it was legalized in the context of vehicle accidents, collisions, if you will,
if you will. Yes. Let's start now.
Because we're so used to the blood alcohol level being sort of an immediate measurement that there is no equivalent.
Right. Okay. So Nevada did this a few years ago. Last year, California barred discrimination in hiring and firing and other employment conditions if a worker is using cannabis off duty. And in the legislature now in Olympia, lawmakers are discussing banning employers in Washington from not hiring somebody solely because their drug test shows cannabis in the system. We're covering the news of the week, and we're going to take a short break, and we're going to continue when we come right back.
The Week in Review continues here on KUOW 94.9. Coming up, a couple conferences happening right now. The Emerald City Comic-Con. Also, there's one coming up, the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. We'll find out why those are interesting. Coming up next here on KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from the UW's Population Health Initiative, created to address the intersecting factors that impact well-being, such as poverty, access to healthcare, and systemic inequities, working to transform research into action. uw.edu/population health.
You're listening to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. Our producer spoke with Marcus. He's fine, taking a break. We're also talking with Seattle Met Magazine Deputy Editor Allison Williams and Seattle Times General Assignment Reporter Amanda Zhou. And Emerald City Comic-Con is happening right now.
Yeah. So if you're walking around downtown and you see some costumes that surprise you a little bit, just remember that's not just the usual Seattle style.
Right. And it's not Mardi Gras. It's Comic-Con. We've discussed that many times on our air here. It's at the convention center, right? But Allison, you're more excited about next week's Association of Writers and Writing Programs conference at that same convention center.
Listen, it's a different kind of nerd. There's, and there's lots of crossover, but this is a few more tote bags maybe than Comic-Con.
Right.
The AWP, as it's called, is a very large conference for sort of narrowly graduate programs for creative writing, but it really turns into a big sort of book event. The keynote is being given by Minjin Lee, who wrote the book Pachinko. Oh gosh, I'm going to mispronounce it, but she is a National Book Award finalist novelist who's going to be coming here, and just days and days of panels and discussions about various issues in literature and the writing scene. And I will say it's can be a little expensive to get into the actual conference, but one of the—
How much is a little expensive? Do you know?
Oh, I want to say it's somewhere north of $350 for access into the panels and stuff. Wow. There's different
$3.50.
Yeah,
huh?
Unfortunately not.
Okay.
Although $3.50 might be a little much for some of the creative writers out there as well. But yeah, it's in the hundreds of dollars, and it's students are often maybe they get some student rates and such. But the really cool thing is, with all these just thousands and thousands and thousands of writers descending on Seattle, is there's going to be so many offsite free readings. Every bookstore in Seattle is going to be hosting multiple events. But bars, cafes, art galleries, music stores. I know there are some zine parties. There's some Northwest Film Forum is doing, I think, a couple events. And you get people who might be coming here. They might be on a panel in the conference center at the very sort of academic setting, but then they're also going to do an evening reading for free with, cheap wine and cheese in the back and writers getting down. So it's a really fun time. And it's a really good time if you're ever interested in maybe getting out and seeing some poetry. If you didn't get enough poetry from Bill Radke's
right
special poetry hour, then there'll be a lot going on.
Right. And this is a marker, just a little marker of where we are in the pandemic. Even a Seattle Writers Conference is not requiring masks.
Yeah. Some of the attendees put together a change.org petition, asking why they weren't seeing the kind of COVID protections that you saw at, say, the World Economic Forum, where they had people with air filters and masking and such like that. And, I think the writing world has some folks that are really looking at disability access, people who are unable to come to a place that they might be exposed to disease. In the past couple of years, they've done more heavily online presence. There is still some hybrid online stuff with this AWP, but they will not be requiring masks.
Mm-hmm. And finally, it just occurs to me how Seattle this conversation is. We are one of, our listeners may know, we're one of 2 American cities to be designated cities of literature by the United Nations.
Indeed.
And you know the other one, I'll bet. I happen to. Yes, you were about, I think you were about to say it.
Is it Iowa?
It's
Yep.
Iowa City. I have a, what is she? A niece by marriage or something who goes to school there, great writing program, but
Absolutely.
They were a city of literature before Seattle.
Yes.
And do you know, how is that measured? Is that number of readers or bookstores or libraries or authors? Or do we just put off the vibe?
I think it's depending on whether you went through this arduous application process.
It was something we had to ask for.
Yeah.
I see. So we had to write an essay.
Yes. I'm going to go with the number of canvas tote bags per capita.
Yeah. It's certainly
probably how it was chosen.
Okay. Has that worked out great? Is that a distinction that Seattle has, that we're a city of literature?
I mean, I don't know that it probably has a much direct impact. I know that this is the second time AWP has been here in the last, 10 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But, things like giant conferences come down to things like convention center space and other factors. But I do think that as a city, we try to sort of have that as one of our calling cards, is a sort of literate reputation. But I will say I love our independent bookstores. We've got a lot of them and they're very active, and I'm proud that we still have them going as a city.
Yeah, it's a really great scene. So many used bookstores,
Yes.
Seattle people love to thrift, and that is no exception when it comes to books.
Right. Okay. So we'll find you at the convention center next week with the tote bag.
You won't recognize me at Comic-Con, but you'll be able
Definitely.
to pick me out.
Okay. Okay. Now we have time left in the show for to surface something that made us smile. As I've said a couple of times, it's often not news unless it's troubling. But I try to break the stranglehold of the bad news. For one thing, I'll contribute something. Jeff Bezos, of course, wants to go to the moon, but one of the many hurdles about moon travel is it's very dusty. And the dust is electrostatically charged. It coats everything. It is abrasive. It can cause lung damage with long-term exposure, and trying to just brush it off damages the spacesuit. But this week, Washington State University, little old WSU researchers announced that they have figured out how to remove almost all of the spacesuit moon dust with a liquid nitrogen spray. And how did they find that out?
They tested here on Earth on a Barbie doll dressed up in a suit.
Yep. The Barbie doll in a suit came clean. And now WSU says its researchers are, quote, working to fully understand and model the complex interactions between the dust particles and liquid nitrogen that allows the cleaning process to work. So they don't even know why it works. It just does. It worked on Barbie, or they just want more grant money. But either way to go, Cougs.
I'm picturing the mechanic and like the spaceships pulling out the filter and like looking at you be like, this really got to be replaced.
Yeah. Dust, serious impediment to travel. Did anything make you smile this week?
Yes. There's some of my Seattle millennial friends are talking about the latest American Girl doll, the new historical one. She is growing up. The year is 1999. That's historical.
That's
now.
Historical?
Yeah. And the thing is that she's actually, there are 2 of them, and they're from Seattle. One of them is really into skateboarding and grunge, and one of their pets is named Buffy. I presume after Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, this is it's making some millennials talk.
I was laughing. I saw that doll, and I think the other pet's name is Blossom.
Yes.
And I was like, Buffy and Blossom are really just 2 different times in 90s girlhood. I'm not sure you can put them together.
Is that TV show Blossom? Is that
Yeah.
what we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that fits.
I must confess for the listeners that I did not really experience 90s girlhood. I was a little bit too young for it.
It was fantastic.
But I'm really dealing well with my childhood being described as historic. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Are you American Girl aficionados?
Oh,
Either one of you?
absolutely. I grew up with my Kirsten. She was a pioneer girl. Now that was history. That was the 1800s.
Right.
I could.
Oh yeah,
That's history.
That was 1990s.
Yeah, it was like World War II and like
yeah,
the colonial day.
Yep,
Right.
yep.
And
No,
you,
she's still sitting in my parents' house. Keeping watch.
Okay, Kirsten. Amanda, American Girl.
Oh yeah, certainly. I
Yeah.
mean, I still remember the plot lines to all those books.
Okay. Yeah, my kid had, I think, a Russian Jewish immigrant who lived in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So when she and I visited Manhattan, yes, we did take the doll. Yes, we did find where her father's fictional shoe store must be based on all the clues.
See, it's educational.
It was educational. I've got a photo
Well,
there.
I
Yeah.
got to tell you, what made me smile this week is I went to a restaurant last night on Capitol Hill that had closed several months ago, Kadaimakan, and they just reopened in a new location. And I went with bated breath to see, if it was going to be the same. It's not exactly the same, but I have to say, seeing the neighborhood come together and, living in the city, you see a lot of stuff close and you mourn it. It's really fun when a new one pops up or a return comes.
I actually went there recently, the new location also, and had a great time.
Yeah, I'm excited about my leftovers. When we having for lunch after this? It's great.
Well, that's a reason to smile. I finally will add that Bruce Springsteen came to Climate Pledge Arena this week, which I did not see, but I did see that he went to Pike Place Market to do what? To save the cherry trees, do you figure?
Did he throw a fish?
You nailed it, Amanda.
Oh man.
TT for Bruce, which I think is code for this is just for tourists, or this is just for like they're not gonna sell this fish. Whatever the TT means. But the boss caught a fish. He has a tour. His tour has a Twitter account, and they posted that video of that fish catching with the caption, Bruce Springsteen being thrown a fish during his free time in Portland.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah. Wow. So most of the replies were just correcting them, but a few other replies. Norm wrote, try it on a fish boat during rough seas. Tom said, now the band is going to smell like low tide. John said, if that was the last fish, charge him $160 and tell him it's dynamic pricing. And Kimba wrote, that is one lucky fish. And Kimba, I don't know that I would feel lucky to be sliced open and thrown at Bruce Springsteen, but that is an upbeat spin on it. And you made me smile. So, and so did you. Thanks to both of you for coming in to KUOW's Week in Review, and Marcus Harrison Green from South Seattle Emerald and Seattle Times. We've been talking with Seattle Times general assignment reporter Amanda Zhou and Seattle Met Magazine deputy editor Allison Williams. Great to see you in person. I hope to do it soon.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Yeah. Enjoy the Writers' Conference, won't you? With the tote bag. Week in Review is produced by Kevin Kniestad, and we have social media and live streaming production from Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu. We have Guy Nelson running the board. I'm Bill Radke. I appreciate you joining us, and I look forward to talking with you again a week from now on Week in Review.